Joining me now to talk about this and a whole lot of other topics is the former FBI Director James Comey. He's the author of the new crime novel Westport, out just this week. Good to see you. We'll talk about your second book in the trilogy in a moment. But first of all, what do you make of all of this reporting and this claims of the FBI potentially assassinating Donald Trump?
It's so nuts that if I tried to put it in the next book, the editor would strike it out and say, come on, who would believe that? As you said to your viewers, it's the standard part of every ops order to remind the agents of these are the rules that govern how we conduct ourselves. Same in every case, whether it's a drug case or you're searching some politician's location.
And some of them are claiming, well, you know, they talked about trying to conceal your weapons, right? Or wearing polo shirts. What was the reason for that?
Well, that actually cuts the other way. That was an unusual part of the ops order to try and make sure it was a low-vis search, that it wouldn't attract attention, embarrassment, press notice. They were trying to keep it quiet.
There's a poll that just came out that says that Americans have a 75% favorable opinion of police, but just a 57% favorable opinion of the FBI. Now, in my view, it's a good thing that still a majority of Americans view the FBI favorably, but what do you make of the gap there?
I'm not sure. My instinct is part of it has to be due to the flamethrower that Donald Trump and his enablers have aimed at the FBI for the last, I don't know now, 7, 8 years.
And every time it seems Chris Wray goes in front of Congress, he's asked about these issues. Here, let's give you a little example of what Chris Wray has said in response.
And the idea that I, as a Republican appointee and a lifelong Republican, am biased in the way that you are describing makes absolutely no sense.
What do you make of that? I mean, Chris Wray has been constantly under fire, particularly from the right. You're a former Republican yourself, saying that he is out to get Republicans.
Yeah, another thing that would be stricken from your novel if you tried to put it in. The FBI follows the facts, which is one of the reasons that the Bureau doesn't have friends in high places. If you're a politician, you can't trust the FBI if you've done something shady, because they're going to track it down no matter what party you're affiliated with. Just look at the record of who's been charged with federal corruption offenses in the last few years. The Bureau is an apolitical organization, and it's good for Director Wray to defend it and express his frustration.
Do you think that this is impacting morale at the FBI, these constant attacks?
Oh, I know it is. I mean, I know because I talk to people there. Of course, when good people internalize these lies that they hear over and over again, echoed from President Trump's mouths, but from lots of other mouths, and they take it on board. They think, oh, there was a problem with the Mar-a-Lago search. That's dispiriting for people in the FBI, because these are their neighbors. The FBI is in every community in this country. They go to ball games, there are cookouts, and they hear this nonsense echoed back at them, and that's painful.
Let me switch topics for a moment. If you had been the Manhattan DA, you were a former top prosecutor in New York, not the Manhattan DA, but in another role, would you have brought the hush money case?
I wasn't sure that I would have when I read the indictment, but now having seen the case, I'm not sure after investigating it how they wouldn't bring it. They had a much stronger case than I imagined, and they'd be taking a pass on it because of who the defendant was, and that's something you don't ever want to do as a prosecutor.
But what about the fact that the feds, including the Biden DOJ, took a pass on it? And you would think that particularly when it comes to the election piece of this, that is typically something that would be tried in a federal court.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, and so I really don't know. There could be all kinds of reasons that I can't see internal to the Department of Justice.
What do you think is going to happen? I can't imagine there'll be anything but a hung jury, but that's just my...
Actually, I have a different take. I think there's an overwhelming chance of a conviction, a significant but much smaller chance of a hung jury, and zero chance of an acquittal.
Why?
Why zero chance of a...
No. Why do you think there's more of a chance of a conviction than a hung jury?
Because they built a very strong circumstantial case. They built a building out of a series of bricks that really couldn't be crossed because they were documents, they were texts, they were the words of the defendant before they went to their cooperator at the end. I bet they even debated whether they needed to call Cohen as a cooperator. And that circumstantial case, at least in my experience, having tried a lot of cases, is very, very powerful with the jury.
But it seems to me that this is a different kind of case, right? That the typical legal analysis that I end up doing on typical cases doesn't apply here. That the questions that jurors maybe aren't supposed to be evaluating, like, are we really here over a payout to a porn star with the former president of the United States, who's now the Republican nominee? sitting here. This is what this is all about. I think that may factor into some of the jurors' thinking, even though that's not what the judge is going to instruct them.
Yeah, maybe, but my gut tells me, and I've had a lot of experience, that they'll be impressed with the way in which the prosecution connected it to broader themes, to an election, to the Trump's need, according to the proof, to suppress information, to conceal it from the voters. That kind of stuff rings loud, I think, in the minds of public-spirited citizens. And when you're on a jury, public spirit just flows through you. So that's why I think it's more likely than not to be a conviction.
In 2021, you wrote in your book that you did not think that Biden should pursue federal prosecution of Donald Trump. You said no matter how compelling the roadmap or how powerful the evidence strewn across his history of porn stars and financial fraud. Later, you actually suggested Biden should consider pardoning him. Do you stand by that?
I don't feel that way now, because that was before January the 6th or the Mar-a-Lago case. I don't know how you don't pursue those cases. But I was attracted then, and honestly still am, to the idea that wouldn't it be good if we could get this demagogue off of center stage? I read a piece by a former CIA counterinsurgency person who said the first thing in sort of deprogramming a cult is get the programmer to the corner so that you can then let people escape the fog of lies. It would be a whole lot better if we weren't seeing Donald Trump, even in the Manhattan case, on our screens every day.
It must be odd being James Comey. I'm listening to you say this and thinking, oh, the right is going to, be infuriated by what James Comey's saying right now. And then I think about how many people on the left are furious at James Comey about reopening the Hillary Clinton investigation 11 days before the election. They believe that you handed the election to Donald Trump. Do you feel like a man without a country?
I don't, for a couple of reasons. First, I don't care that much what the ends of our bell curve think. They're in such bubbles that each thinks I'm on the other team's side. I think there's a whole swath of people in the middle who've taken the time to understand the way in which the FBI conducts itself, who feel pretty good about it. And apart from that, my family loves me, and I feel good about the decisions I made.
Do you have any regrets? I mean, now you even mentioned you've kind of changed your view in part based on things that have happened, but in part based on looking back on it. Anything you look back on now about what happened in 2016, for example, that you would have done differently?
Oh, a number of small things, but not on the big decisions. That I faced a very difficult decision. Even through all the lens of time, I don't see it differently. I could not conceal from the Congress, the American people, that we had reopened that investigation. After testifying under oath all summer that we're done, you can ignore us, we're done, we're done, we're done. Now I know we're not done, and the result may change. How do I conceal that? So I don't feel differently about the major decision. I hated in the moment we were involved, and that has not changed.
And including the coming out when you made the decision not to charge and giving very specific accounts and critical of Hillary Clinton, right thing to do?
Yeah, and consistent with Department of Justice tradition, which you've actually seen since then, of offering transparency in cases where the details matter to folks' confidence that the system has acted justly.
Some on the left have linked the release of your October 2016 letter announcing reopening the investigation to Robert Hur's report on Joe Biden. The point being that in both instances, a prosecutor ended up disclosing what the left would argue is irrelevant information in an effort to, Robert Hur's case, hurt Joe Biden, in your case, to hurt Hillary Clinton. Fair comparison?
No, on a number of levels. First, I wrote a 2-sentence letter to the chairs and rankings of the committees where I had testified under oath we were done, and Mr. Hur issued a detailed report, so it's hard to compare those two things.
What do you make of the Samuel Alito controversy? The fact that turns out that he, at his house, had an upside-down flag. He says it was his wife, right after January 6th, and now we learned in the last day that there was another flag that has been associated with January 6th that was at another house that he had. Do you think he should have to recuse himself from cases involving Donald Trump?
I don't know. I mean, it's concerning. The upside-down flag is confusing and concerning. This latest flag, I'm not an expert in extremist flag waving, but is also concerning. I just think he ought to do a little bit of what he did before, which is account for, so why is this there? And how is this consistent with your role as a Supreme Court justice? I can't speak to the issue of recusal.
And any thoughts on whether Clarence Thomas should have to recuse based on his wife's involvement in January 6th?
No useful thoughts.
Thoughts, but probably don't want to share them.
Well, also, I'm not an expert, and so
Yeah.
you have access to plenty of smart people who know the standard better than I.
Before we talk about your book, let me just ask you just big picture. I think I asked you this years ago, but I want to ask you again. In addition to a man who wrote great novels, what are you hoping that your legacy will be?
Oh, that's easy. That I was a great father, husband, and grandfather. The rest is not important to me. I know who I want to have been, and I mind my grandchildren every week, and that matters to me. It's the reason I dedicated this book to them. That's who I want to be remembered by and what I want to be remembered as.
You are out discussing this book. It's called Westport. It is the second in a trilogy. Same protagonist. Before I ask you a little bit about the book, have you used your own experience, obviously, in what you did to create the protagonist and the details in the book?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, the protagonist is inspired by my girls, especially my oldest daughter, who's a federal prosecutor right now. And so I picture them when I write that character, which makes it easy. But yeah, I've tried to, people who know better than I have said, write what you know when you're writing fiction. So I've tried to draw on my actual experiences and take people in a way that I think will be great summer reading, take them inside a murder in a financial management company.
Yeah, talk to us about what the difference is, and because this is a continuation from the first book, quick summary of what the first book was and how this is a follow-up from that.
Yeah, the first book is a mob investigation book where Nora Carlton is handling a mob case with her partner, a gruff, enormous Brooklyn-born mafia investigator, also based on one of my longtime friends. And the two of them struggle with all kinds of problems in that case. She gets so burnt out that she moves to the suburbs and goes to work for a large hedge fund as their general counsel. And in the opening, I'm not giving anything away to your folks, one of her colleagues is found murdered, and the eye of law enforcement falls on her. And she has to figure out how to navigate that in a way that I think is pretty twisty and will be interesting to people.
And there's a third one coming as well?
Yep, coming next spring. It's a domestic terrorism-based. She's back in Manhattan, returns to government, and is grappling with some of the challenges of the FBI's work against what the FBI will call white identity extremism, so domestic violence.
The book is called Westport. I want to ask you one more question. I want to make sure we got to talk about the book a little bit, but just a big picture on the political future of the country. You concerned about this election?
Very much, yeah. I think this election is a time for people to realize our policy disagreements about important stuff are below something that we ought to all have in common, a commitment to the rule of law. Nobody should be a low information voter this fall. And so if you don't remember, don't let me tell you what to do. Go watch videos of January the 6th. Go listen to the voices of Donald Trump's former cabinet saying this dude should never be anywhere near the Oval Office. And if that doesn't do it for you, watch one of his rallies and then decide who you want to vote for. But you must vote, because this thing is above all of the things we normally argue about.
Are you surprised that he's doing as well as he is?
No, because I know the power of a demagogue. It's what our founders feared. Very hard for people to escape that fog of lies. And I hope that people will drag themselves out of it by getting some real information about the stakes here.
But big picture, you would still, in other elections, potentially vote for Republicans, correct?
Well, I don't know when those, how far
I mean,
in the future
not for
you're talking.
president. I mean, for senator, for Congress,
Sure.
for mayor, for whatever it is.
Yeah, I think we should try and pick the best
I mean,
person.
do you view yourself as a Democrat now?
I consider myself an independent, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden because I know what's at stake.
Yeah. James Comey, thank you so much for coming in.
Great to be with you, Dan.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.